A natural question to ask here is money inherently tied to a nation state? So some authors see money as inherently linked to the definition of a nation state, even if elements of conventional credit creation and money supply are not directly controlled by nation states. Within this, I think the separation between money and nation states can get problematic. So things like currencies are important with respect to the payment of national taxes. Whenever you get this separation between money and nation state, things are necessarily more complex. The lack of centralized control, explicit in Bitcoin's original construction, is seen by some as a fundamental weakness. Remember, the whole point was if you don't have a central hub like the Bank of England, then the idea behind Bitcoin is that at the same time you don't have a central point of weakness. The comparison between cryptocurrencies and wildcat money in this paper here by Ekan and Baloglu suggests that early innovations like Bitcoin are ultimately vulnerable to things like national legislation, such as the Swiss e-franc, and large, e.g. US financial institutions. So if they innovate sufficiently, will they then render things obsolete overnight? Okay, so there's a possibility of failure here, even if you haven't necessarily made an obvious mistake. Okay, once again, historical perspective, very important. Further cryptocurrency concerns include the following. So there's an association, at least in some parts of the press, with illegal activities, precisely because in the design of cryptocurrencies it's difficult to trace payments. Cybersecurity is a big concern, and this was an issue with some of the early Bitcoin exchanges. Tax is a big issue, so even if there's no criminal intent, this must inevitably get tricky if you start to make the separation between what money is and the nation state. Beyond that, the tax implications of Bitcoin are often different in different countries and different jurisdictions. Extreme price risks are arguably inherent to all cryptocurrencies. You could view this as being a sort of central economic facet of these markets. A paper there I published in 2018. There's all sorts of potential unintended consequences associated with new technologies. Again, the historical perspective is very insightful here, and I think that cryptocurrencies beyond that are inherently controversial as an idea. That's why they're so interesting from an economics and finance perspective. So these things are inherently risky if you start to try and separate money from a nation state. Also, this lack of central governance, which I would argue means that you're likely to get quite extreme bubble effects occurring time and time again. The lecture has discussed some economic and financial aspects of blockchain and Bitcoin, and within this, the historical perspective is very, very important, and it's perhaps easy to overlook the importance of that with the title of economic and financial aspects. Okay, but it's often the historical perspective that's most useful. Bitcoin is the original motivation behind blockchain, but the blockchain technology is potentially much bigger than just cryptocurrencies. Bubbles and speculation always accompany the development of new markets and an influx of new investors. You've potentially got both sides of this with cryptocurrencies, and this is something we will discuss in more detail in the next lecture. However, beyond just a sort of generic facet of speculation associated with new technologies and new investors, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are inherently more speculative than that, precisely because you're doing new things like trying to separate the notion of money from a nation state, and you've got no central governance structure. So this, combined with dramatic historically observed price swings, makes them so interesting from an economics and finance perspective. Now, whilst these are undeniably interesting, at the same time they are undeniably risky. Now, I wouldn't ordinarily do this, but I think it's perhaps worth at this juncture to spend more time than I ordinarily would in terms of going through the references. So what this is intended to do is, it says there rather pompously, show the multidisciplinary and contemporary nature of the subject. So more than one discipline is important because it's such a big subject. Okay, it's also a very contemporary subject. Okay, so it's very rare for me to be teaching something that's so closely linked to some of my own past research, and also that's so closely linked to cutting edge economics and finance research. Within this, you've got some references that are a bit older, and they reflect this, I think, very important idea that you need to appreciate historical perspectives. Also, there is some area of overlap with existing technology. Okay, the range of popular titles as well within these references show that unusually for something that I teach, usually I teach heavy going maths, the subject of Bitcoin and blockchain has really caught the public imagination, less so for econometrics, unfortunately, and the lecture itself derives heavily from two papers I've had published recently. So the paper that I won a Best Paper Prize for last year, and a paper which I had published in 2020. In terms of these references then, so the paper by Abrahamson in 1991, so this gets across the idea that people who adopt new technologies don't necessarily benefit from that. This paper by Anderson and Murdoch lends weight to this idea of the historical perspective being very, very important, and historically payment systems have failed in all sorts of unanticipated ways. The paper by Chatsoglu and Chatsoudis, so there's a sense in which you can actually view blockchain and Bitcoin as extending already existing aspects of e-business. So the paper there had published by Chair and Fry. So this is my first paper on Bitcoin. It's been cited over 700 times, and this was really nice to get such a paper in this journal and to have had such a amount of success with that in terms of the citations. And then the paper at the bottom there by Dukic. So the idea here is it's very difficult to define a genuine currency as being completely separate from a nation state. Certainly I think that whenever you try and make this separation, as is the case with these cryptocurrencies, between money and the nation state, and things can get very, very controversial very, very quickly. The book by Dowd gives a very good overview of some of the economic issues associated with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. It's useful for discussion of things like the potential separation between technical innovation and commercial success, things like Betamax versus VHS. The paper by Eakin and Bologlu, again, this makes explicit the idea that you can learn an awful lot from studying historical aspects of economics and finance. So the comparison is made between the cryptocurrencies and wildcat monies in the free banking era, and this has various sort of implications in terms of the long-term sustainability for current day cryptocurrencies. The paper by Freund, this is useful for stating that in recent history blockchain technology remained vulnerable to hacking, and this is something that needs to be addressed despite, again, clear evidence of early technological innovation. Paper I published in 2018. So the idea with this is that the extreme price risks that are associated with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency markets is sort of central to their definition as a market. And the paper I published in 2016 there won a prize for. And one thing that this really taught me is, although we won the prize, just how quickly. So the first paper I had published there at the top with Jean-Philippe Sibera, Sheffield Hallam University. It's actually been formally published in 2020, and the idea there is that there can be a marked separation between Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and the underlying blockchain technology if you look at things like Google search queries. So the paper by Holicek et al. Gives an interesting literature review on blockchain technology and potential issues and applications that go alongside that. The paper by Hu et al. Discusses applying blockchain technology to promote the development of distributed photovoltaic technology in China. So this is, I think, really interesting that it shows that blockchain technology can be applied to all sorts of new things and different things that you may have never possibly even thought of before. And the paper by Huckel et al. Is interesting in terms of a discussion of blockchain and potential applications. Okay, so all sorts of potential applications, potentially much more far-reaching than you might ordinarily have imagined. So there's a paper there by Ian City and Lucani. It's noteworthy it's in Harvard Business Review, a very prestigious journal. This is useful for a wide-ranging discussion, in particular discussion of the possibility that blockchain may ultimately take decades to be fully absorbed into our economic and social infrastructure. So the paper by John, published in 2018, this is useful for discussion of all sorts of possible applications of blockchain technology. Again, lots and lots of things here that you may possibly have never thought of before. So all sorts of applications listed here. So things like EID, land registers, social security records, and securities trading. Remember, the key things here that you've got with these applications are either convenience, which just replaces a load of bureaucracy, or consensus. It's absolutely important that you get records exactly correct and as correct as humanly possible. And then there's the book here by Lawrence. Now I've included this here just to show that, unusually for my course, usually I teach some arcane financial maths or econometrics, but here what I'm teaching is blockchain, and blockchain, as the title shows you there, is a subject of immense popular interest. So go through some more of these references then. So the paper by Nofer et al., published in 2017, is useful for a discussion of various different possible blockchain applications. So these include things like insurance, music industry download royalties, decentralized storage and logistics, decentralized Internet of Things, and anti-counterfeit measures. Now the paper by Sharma and Rutroy, published in 2016, this discusses the potential blockchain application in relation to modeling information risk in supply chains. And the paper by Sojo et al., so similar to some items in the news at the moment, this includes a discussion of concerns that unequal levels of economic development remain a barrier to widespread blockchain implementation, in the same way that unequal economic development can get in the way of online learning in schools. And then the book by Tapscott and Tapscott. So this is a Penguin book, and this again just reflects that, unusually for material that I teach, this is a subject, Bitcoin and blockchain, of immense public interest. Okay, so necessarily a multifaceted subject. So the final watch of references then for this lecture, so the paper by Vranken, published in 2017. So this includes a discussion of the sustainability of Bitcoin and blockchains, and the interesting thing here is that there are question marks about whether the things are environmentally sustainable given the amount of electricity involved in the mining processes. And then papers by Yermak. So the first one asks, can you have a real currency if the thing is separate from the nation state? And the second paper asks if Bitcoin is a genuine currency or just a speculative asset. And then the paper by Zera in 1999. This is a very good economics paper. I love to cite this. And what this is saying is that there are often logical, fundamental economic processes that accompany process of bubbles and crashes. So usually these include either the development of new technologies or an influx of new investors. Now you've got both of those ingredients with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, but potentially other speculative elements on top of that. So as soon as you start to try and separate money from the nation state, this inevitably becomes controversial, even if there is not necessarily any malign intent involved.